Welcome to Musicians Peer Support, everybody. Today we are welcoming Jon Altham. Everybody give it up for Jon Altham. Thank you, Jon, for being here. How are you doing?
Great, thank you. And
Good.
you?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very grateful that you're here. I was just saying off camera how grateful I am for you. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this for us. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for being in the room. Susie, Deb, Gretchen, and Kelly. We are recording. And welcome everybody to the recording. If you're watching the replay, thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to join us at a live session. Also join the mailing list. Also comment below and let me know if you guys have any other questions about this class. But I think without further ado, we're ready to get started, huh, Jon?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So how about we recap a little bit of week two?
Oh, yeah, let's do it. So, um, I'll share my screen just to begin with.
Sure.
Um, Dive into that, and then we'll go into the next chapter. And as always, if you've got any questions or any points of clarity, feel free to raise them. And just to mention as well, I mentioned previously or in other theories that there are workbooks that go along with this, and they're all completed now, all the way up to this third chapter. So feel free to dive into those and provide any feedback if you want that in future episodes. I'm happy to recap anything that you might have learned from that or any questions that might come up. I'm more than
Thank you
happy
for
to do
that.
it. The second chapter from survival to structure. Um, I guess, initially we came from the awareness aspect of things, and this was our next foundation, really, of why structure is so important. Because without it, you're in this kind of survival cycle and loop, which is just very, very chaotic at best, to be honest with you. And the key takeaways from this really were you cannot control how the world receives your work, but you can control how you build it. You cannot stop uncertainty, but you can reduce its power through structure. And you cannot eliminate chaos, but you can organize it into rhythm. And then we kind of dived into this diagram at the bottom, showing the inner circle of the chaos of the creative sector and sectors generally, and then the outside, the ideal world, where when you've got the structure in place, everything moves into more of a coherent pattern from design to build, measure, and then refine and scale. And that allows you to kind of build that structure and then scale it further in a way that aligns to you. I'll leave it there to begin with
Yeah,
and
and
scroll
John,
up
if you
just a
don't mind,
tad.
maybe we can just zoom in on that graphic again, just because
Sure.
that is just so important here. And do you mind just giving just a brief little synopsis of what this is here for people?
Yeah, sure. So effectively, it summarizes up that prior chapter really, really nicely. Effectively saying that normally when we're going through our careers, we tend to be in the inside cycle where we're in this constant loop of creating, releasing, hoping that what we've done to date works and aligns and is going to hit that viral trend. And we're reacting to all this outside noise that is around us. And then we're just repeating that process. And often what we find is that we just get completely burnt out as a result of it and or not actually aligned to who we are or what we want to do. There's no reflection point. There's this constant cycle of it's just taking energy away from you. And we mentioned how think of, we used the red colors in this, but think of that as the negative energy. It's kind of pulling you away. If you think about a balance sheet or a royalty statement, anything that's usually in the red is normally something that is negative, taking money away from you. Anything that's in the black usually is the fact that you're either making money or you're breaking even, right? So that's the same kind of concept where the reds were there on purpose as a kind of energy drainer. The outside, however, is what it looks like when you've got structure. And it actually that allows you to then scale your foundation further. So firstly, it's about design. And what does that mean? That could mean about putting or designing specific frameworks in place that allow you to stay really aligned with who you are. Or it could be very specific to a deal term, or the fact that we mentioned before, someone who's playing the guitar right for the first time. What does design mean to them? Maybe it's putting in an hour aside in order to do their this. You go through that cycle. You then you build those frameworks even further, and you basically apply that into practice. You then measure that. In business terms, it's a little bit like having KPIs or key performance indicators. But we can distill that a lot more simply by saying, very simply, does this work with me? Yes or no? And does it align with who I am? Yes or no? From there, we then are able to refine that process further. If it didn't align with me, why? And how can I improve that the next time? Um, for example, if we use the guitar analogy of practicing a new instrument, you might find that actually it's not the instrument that you want to do, and that's fine. But you found that out because it doesn't align with you. And part of that refine and scale is that you're now aligned and grounded to who you are and what you want, and therefore you're scaling yourself. In the context of a business, you're then refining that process further, and you're able to scale that as a result now that the foundation is designed and built.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, John. And some of the things that you went through in the past few weeks, which is really, really valuable to me, and just kind of little bullet points that I had were clarity is power, calm is
Mm,
leverage, strength in stillness. Things that I really love that you talk about: coherence, serving the
mm,
art, founder versus follower, dignity versus greed, emotion to architecture. These are really huge concepts that you get into, and we just talked about briefly in the past couple weeks. But I wanted to kind of bring into context as we get into week 3. Structure is protection. That was a big one for me. I loved that. Chaos into rhythm. Um,
mm.
consistency is something I can't read my notes. Compounds into mastery. Oh,
Yes.
consistency is what compounds into mastery.
Yes.
Yes. And then progress over performance and
Yeah, I like
alignment
that.
over ambition. Alignment over ambition. And so I just really love your concepts and kind of giving us these foundations. And so thank you so much for that little recap. And I think we're ready to get into week 3,
Sure.
chapter 3.
Did anyone have any questions on any of that or points to raise before we move in?
Okay,
Cool.
great. Thank you.
So the 3, the artist wealth formula. So as I mentioned previously, you hear the word wealth thrown around a lot on the internet. And it's like this trendy word, which in my opinion is a little bit annoying. Um, and it's quite ironic because as we go through this chapter, we actually really start to unpick what that illusion actually is. And quite often what we find is what it's portrayed to be actually is very misaligned to where we actually want to go. It's quite interesting. Um, so the whole point of this chapter really is to think about sustainability. That's the key theme here. So in previous chapters, it was about awareness, then foundation, and this one is purely sustainability. Your career, what does that mean, and how we're going to go through it? There's basically two key principles as parts of this chapter. It's fairly short, um, and then I hope we can kind of dive into them in a little bit more detail. One is called the capital stack, and the second one is your artist balance sheet. They're two separate diagrams, and we'll dive into them in quite a bit of detail. Um, and I feel that those really kind of ground this chapter out really, really quite nicely. So, why wealth requires ownership, structure, and predictable systems. Redefining wealth. Most people hear the word wealth, they think of money. It's often something distant, almost incompatible with purity or purpose. The industry has conditioned creators to separate art from commerce, as if one contaminates the other. Yet, each time you release a song, sell a license, or sign an agreement, you're building an economy, even if you don't call it that. Wealth in its truest form is not excess, it's stability, ownership, and the freedom to choose what you create next. Not about being rich, it's about being resourced. When your creativity generates sustainable value, you can build without fear. That is real wealth. Why artists stay broke? It is not because they lack talent or drive. It's because the system around them was designed to prioritize dependency over independence. Artists are often told to focus on the music, to trust the business to others. Yet those others build their careers on the value artists create. The result is predictable. Creators end up carrying the weight while others hold the rights. Financial illiteracy is not a personal failure. It's a byproduct of an industry that profits when you stay uninformed. Breaking that cycle begins with understanding how value is actually created, multiplied, and protected. So, three layers of artist wealth. There are three layers to every artist's economy. Think of them as the structure beneath your creative life. One, creative capital. These are your songs, performances, compositions, and catalogs. These are your intellectual assets. They are the starting point of every transaction and the most powerful source of long-term value you'll ever own. Two, operational capital. These are the systems, the partnerships, and the routines that convert creativity into revenue. These are your teams, agreements, automation, and distribution networks. Without operational capital, your creative capital leaks value. And thirdly, relational capital. This is the trust, goodwill, and reputation that opens doors. This is the unseen currency of the creative world, but people buy into reliability long before they buy into your art. When all three work together, wealth compounds naturally. When one is missing, you spend more time repairing than creating. Here's a little diagram to summarize that up quite nicely, which we'll loop back into towards the end. Turning creativity into currency. Creativity only becomes currency when it meets structure. Songs sitting on a hard drive is art. However, song, registered, distributed, and licensed is an asset. The difference is not the music itself, it's the system around it. The artist who understands publishing splits, royalty flows, and back-end rights does not have to chase opportunity, can design it. When you know your numbers, your value increases in every conversation. Clarity is leverage. Goal is not to turn art into accounting. To build a system where the two coexist, where creativity feeds commerce and commerce sustains creativity. So, the four principles of sustaining wealth. One, ownership creates freedom. First rule of wealth is control. If you do not own it, you cannot grow it. Keep your masters, your publishing, your likeness, and your data wherever possible. If you must, share ownership, understand why, and then set clear limits. Structure creates scale. Systems multiply effort. Build repeatable processes for releases, collaborations, and finances. The more predictable your operations, the more time you can reclaim for creativity. And three, clarity creates confidence. Know what you earn, where it comes from, and when it arrives. Track everything. Confidence in negotiation does not come from personality, it comes from preparation. And finally, integrity creates longevity. Relationships are built on trust, last longer than contracts. The artist who sustains wealth are not the ones who fight the hardest, but the ones who operate transparently. Integrity compounds faster than interest. Income streams and the flow of value. The modern artist has more income opportunities than ever, yet most still rely on one or two. Diversification is not just a financial strategy, it's emotional security. Here are the core income streams for every artist that they should understand. First, your master royalties. These are from recording works and streaming platforms. Publishing royalties from songwriting and compositional rights. Think licensing from film, TV, games, and advertisement. Performance income from live shows and broadcast royalties. Merchandising and brand collaborations, which is turning your identity into value. And finally, education, consulting, or mentorship, sharing expertise and building secondary income. When you understand where each stream originates and how it flows, you can begin to predict revenue, allocate time wisely, and plan for long-term sustainability. The compounding power of retention. Every time you give away ownership, you give away future earnings. More percentage today might feel harmless. For years, that same percentage becomes exponential. Retention is not about greed, about dignity and foresight. Keep enough of your rights to sustain your vision. Build slow, keep control, and let time do the compounding. Remember, wealth is not created through rapid expansion, created through consistent retention. Measuring true success. Success is not measured by streams or followers. Measured freedom. And you choose your projects. And you take time off without fear. And you sustain your team without debt or dependency. The answer is yes, you're wealthy, even without the chart. Money will come and go, ownership remains. Artist Blueprint, it's not about chasing numbers, it's about designing a life where your creativity funds your peace, not your pressure. Key takeaways. Wealth is not money, it is control, stability, and time. Creativity becomes currency only when it meets structure. Ownership compounds faster than exposure. And systems multiply value, whilst integrity preserves it. This wealth formula is not complex, it is clarity, applied consistently. Once you understand that, not playing the short game, just building a legacy. And finally, the last part, the artist balance sheet, which summarizes the points above into two specific columns, your assets and liabilities. On the left, your assets, your masters, your publishing, your brand catalog, equity, and the data. That data could be your own personal data that you hold, whether that be your royalties and the likes, but it could also be the data of your mailing list, for example. Your liabilities, your advances, debts, exploitation risk, non-reversion rights, and buyouts. All very, very important, but always typically take value away from what you're doing, depending on how you structure it. And finally, that takeaway, equity is the ownership percentage, your freedom percentage, and the peace index in terms of how it aligns to you. Remember, every song is equity. I'll leave it there. There's lots to unpack, so
Yes,
I'm
lots
sure.
to unpack. Thank you so much for that. And just for the replay, I'm switching views and stuff. So thank you for your patience, everybody. So in the room, everybody, if you have any questions on what we just talked about, please feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat and we can go through that. But gosh, it's just gems on gems in these little bits here. Um, being rich versus being resourced. I really
Mm,
love that. And that wealth is about control and time and stability and ownership and freedom and not about money. Um, and that integrity compounds faster than, oh my gosh, what is it? What's the answer? I can't even read my own writing. Integrity. Oh, not exposure.
integrity creates longevity,
Hmm.
and it compounds faster than interest.
And that integrity goes with alignment, right? Because you're, you know, I mean, it's just in my own personal experience. I'm just thinking about like things you say no to, things you would and wouldn't do, or
Yeah.
people you maybe would or would not work with, no offense or anything, but like you, if it doesn't align, um, then that makes it more along the lines of integrity rather than doing something not in alignment, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I use the word interest there on purpose because it's, as you'll find throughout this,
That's what it
I
is.
think
Yeah.
it's I think
Interest.
I think you started to kind of realize as we've gone through these chapters that the word some of these words have they've got a lot more layers to them, and you can apply them in different ways. But
Yeah.
that interest word was there specifically because that could mean interest of other people, i.e. attention, or it could be financial interest, i.e. debt.
Yeah, because
And
that was
there's
the
other
first thing.
layers within that too.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
I love that. And I did notice that, and it's really cool. I mean, it's just right up my alley to have those
Yeah.
to have that style. It's like, what does that mean? Let's talk about it. Because
Yeah.
yeah, integrity compounds faster than interest. That's what my note was. Um, because you're, I mean, John, isn't it like I've always been a little bit like careful because like I've been trying to build a name for myself and it's been like 30 years, and like so far I'm still here. And so I kind of tend to be a little bit hesitant and kind of I don't want to take risks because I don't want to risk my reputation and integrity. So there's this kind of caution moving forward in everything I do because I've already built this for 30 years. And so the alignment thing makes sense to me because what's the compass? Like, how do I decide what and what not to do? And when we come
Yeah.
from a place of alignment, that helps us decide a little bit better.
Yeah, 100%. And I've experienced that myself as well. Um, and it's actually I'll give some context. It was, building Sandwich Studios, for example, first company for the first time. It was my baby. Like I'm sure you got your own career as it is. You've nurtured that thing. You just hope that it doesn't fall at the last hurdle. And yeah, it can be very, very stressful. And I understand what you mean in terms of, is that next project going to risk that reputation or your integrity, and then it all kind of collapses? And how do we make that decision? Um, what I would share is that there was a particular instance in the early days of the company. It was a film deal actually, where we would have been there and effectively done all the music for this project. It's big budget project, and it would have made a massive difference. But effectively, the terms weren't aligned to what I founded the whole company to do. Um, and that was, for me, it was a very easy decision, like very, very decision. I just, for me, I was like straight away, look, these are kind of the principles on this. I'm going to kind of stand my ground on it. And if the deal doesn't come through, then it's okay. I'm happy to walk away. Um, and as I said, I was happy with that decision. But it was interesting that those who weren't necessarily understanding, or I didn't have context as to where that foundation came from, they were like, I don't understand as to why you're giving this deal up because financially it's a game changer. Like it's a big project. It would set your whole portfolio up. Financially, you probably wouldn't have to do anything for several years. So it's a really, really big deal. Um, but ultimately, I thought to myself, if I ever had to talk about it in the future or the company in the future, um, which is, did I at all costs do everything I could to protect the rights of the artists and writers that were working with us? If I couldn't answer that honestly and say, yes, I did, then I couldn't sign the deal. And unfortunately, in that case, they would take all the rights and I couldn't accept it.
Yeah.
So that just for a bit of context is
Sure.
in terms of that, and it was brutal. And as I mentioned through here, it's quite interesting because um, to understand that kind of ownership of keeping things close. And there are times, obviously, where you're a little bit more lax, but it's a bit more strategic in how you go about it. It depends how it aligns. Um, but the point being is, this is not something that's going to be. it's going to happen tomorrow. It's this thing that just compounds and compounds and compounds and compounds. Um, and the more that you do it and the more repetitions that you have, the easier it is to say yes and no to certain.
Yeah. Reminder to the room, go ahead and ask your questions if you have any. But if you don't, I'd love to take a look at each of the graphics, John, and maybe we
Yeah.
can just discuss in detail some of the points. Um, the first one you had with the capital, the artist capital stack. This is really effective for me to look at it like this, um, because like the relational capital, tell me why you have that at the bottom of your pyramid.
The reason being is simply because in my view, I believe that's the foundation to everything. Um, there's various examples out there. You could use Kanye West, right? He had a very, very successful career, and then unfortunately, various posts and what have you completely tore away all the brand deals and net worth that he had accumulated over those years. Use that as a little bit of an example to lean on, but it's where kind of your relational capital and your reputation really can either make or break your brand. I don't think there's that saying where, your reputation, it takes ages to kind of, I can't remember exactly, but it takes ages to build, but it can be wrecked in like a couple of seconds or by one bad review. It's completely true. And it could be that one post that is completely polar, and as a result, everything just crumbles. And unfortunately, as a result of that, you could have all the partnerships in the world, all the systems in place to automate your processes and make sure it's all distributed so you can align, and spend time on your creativity. But ultimately, will people want to listen to your songs, your catalogs at the end of it? Probably not. And it completely wrecks your audience. So, in my view, that's why I think that is the most important thing. And the other thing as well is that with relational capital, where does that really speak to? It speaks to yourself and your alignment and your own foundation of who you are.
Yeah.
So let's start there, build that, then move forward.
Yeah. Um, because I can have a really, really great song. Um,
Mm.
but if I'm sitting at home and not getting out there and not talking to anybody, um, nobody's really gonna know about what I do. So I have to build those relationships. Um, and the trust and the reputation and integrity. And I mean, what does that look like for people? I mean, we have Kelly in the room. I reached out to Kelly. She's a successful DJ in town. She, seems like an amazing person. Said, I'd love to meet with you and see if maybe we get along. Maybe we could be friends or something like that. We hit it off. We got along pretty well, and that to me is like now maybe I can help build some trust between us. Maybe we build a friendship, um, and build relationships. I mean, it's not like what can I do for you and what can you do for me, but it's about how do we start a relationship? How do we do something on the higher part of your triangle, but from that foundation of just having a good relationship. And you're another example, John. We talked a little bit off camera when you were switching and stuff. I was like telling them that relationship we had online of just chatting about business stuff and just like talking about things like that was cultivated over time because we had very many conversations about different things. And so maybe you'd come back and you'd know that maybe I'll ask some questions that would be interesting, or I mean, it was like if after a couple conversations you might not want to even talk to me ever again. So I really appreciate this graphic of like the relational capital, because sometimes it's kind of downplayed, right? It's like, oh yeah. I mean,
100%.
when I started, I was like 20, 21 or whatever it was. They're like, gotta build relationships, cultivate relationships. And it's almost like, okay, I'm gonna roll my eyes. Like, what does that even mean? But it's very, very real, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, relationships are very, very important. We touched on it in the first chapter of how important if you can count on one hand the first five people that you talk to or in your contact list that you speak to every day, how much that kind of shapes your career, what your interests are, and how almost kind of your worldview to some extent, to be honest. A little bit how social media is everyone else's equivalent of that. But it is super important, and I think what's quite interesting is I think it's a way to be incredibly disruptive within your industry as well. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive, and equally, when someone says, "Oh yeah, you need to build relationships and you need to, you know, operate with integrity and build trust," everyone kind of rolls their eyes like, "Yeah, well, that's a given. I kind of expect that," but no one actually puts it in practice, and it's really, 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 really important. Um, and actually, when you work your way up, it makes producing the songs, the catalogs, and everything else so much easier. And often, all we actually ever focus on is the bit at the top, which is the creative capital. We don't even have the systems and the partnerships like that. That's like the business level of where the relationships comes in. Um, but it kind of also speaks to those artists, for example, that have use the majors and not to slate the majors because as I said before, like at the right time they can be very, very good strategic tools. But they might have gone on a talent show, for example, and they end up signing or being locked into a creative deal. There's the creative capital, fantastic. Their operational capital is the label. But where we talk about before, who owns the data, who owns the revenue streams and all of that, that sits with the label. So the operational capital and that capital stack actually sits slightly outside of you. Now those two are really, really good. But what happens and how these deals end up falling apart is the relational capital at the bottom of it, the trust, the reputation, the integrity. Was the deal transparent? Did you really understand the terms of what you were signing? Was your expectation in terms of your sound and your career and your direction where you wanted it and what you wanted to go? That's where it falls. And that's what really where these deals tend to break apart because the artist either isn't aligned with the sound of the box that they've now been put into, or they feel misinformed, or misaligned with the contract that they signed at the time in which they signed. Obviously, there are other factors as well, but it just kind of shows how important that layer is. And really, if that was the focus to begin with, I would expect more success to be seen off the back end.
Yeah, and it's not like you're doing one at a time. I mean, you have to work on all these things at the same time, but I see how that is the foundation because in order to build operational capital in terms of systems and partnerships, and I mean partnerships. I mean you have to have how do you build partnerships is through your relational capital. So it's not like you're doing only one of these things at a time, John, right? You're cultivating all three of these things. Um, to come up with the success that we want.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as well now. I mean, as I said, I'm not really one for social media much, but artist Youngblood is really quite an interesting one. I'd actually not come across his music before. What I came across was a video that I saw, and it spoke to me on the relational capital front. It was about him setting up, I think it was called Bloodfest, which is this kind of concert that he set up. It was incredibly grounded, and then after that, it was his interaction with his fans. And I just fell in love with the brand, him and what he's doing. He's just so grounded. I loved every aspect of it. And I was like, I'm in. Like, and then I listened to the music. Which is interesting because typically you'll hear something on Spotify, YouTube, whatever, and that'll be the way that you come into an artist. I think slowly now we're getting in a period where there is so much access to things all the time and so much noise. I think the clarity really comes through the bottom stage in relational capital, and it's where you're going to see these micro communities bubble up out of nowhere.
Hmm. And so what you're saying is this relational capital doesn't necessarily mean, okay, what me as an artist, I need to make relationships and go out and meet people. It's also in that example, the artist is doing his thing by trying to build relational capital through social media, and it was effective in gaining a
Mm,
relationship in you. And so it's
yeah.
it's it's not just um, It's not just an in-person, like, let me reach out and let me have a coffee with somebody. In that example, it's um, your presence, your online presence, and all of that.
Yeah, it's like being aligned and let's say being human at scale, right? Into every interaction. And it's quite interesting because in using that example, looking at through a lot of the comments on those posts, it was a similar theme as to why people then started listening to, which was interesting. It's like I had not come across this music before, but I just love how he treats his fans and what he does.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go and listen. And it's like that's so cool. And you're starting to see this, and it's really where I got that kind of itch for artist management again. Because I've started to see a couple of other rising stars coming out of the UK. I mentioned before a couple of them, and particularly the female artists are absolutely superb at the moment. And there's some that are coming through that are just incredibly grounded in their sound. And listening to the interviews back, how they got there is really doing the inner work and understanding who they are and what they will and won't accept, but equally, what their sound is and who they are and where they are on that journey, being incredibly honest. And then they just scale through that. And they create some wonderful art as a result.
I love that so much, John, because that's what we talk about at MPS is, your authentic expression and knowing your sound. Um, and I guess this is maybe a good time to mention, to get into, a little bit of the four-letter word I call sync, um, which is
Yeah.
like, all right, I'm gonna sign up for this thing. I'm gonna get some briefs, and it's like they need this and that, and it's like they want it to sound like this and that, and I'm behind my computer and I'm gonna try to write something that's like that, still coming from my own authentic expression. But I really love the idea of an artist building their own sound and having that sound, and then you can look at briefs and do all that stuff, but your sound is established, you have developed that, and you've done that
Mm.
inner work, like you said, to really find out what that sound is. And that's why we do artist development at MPS, because it's like our independent artists, we have to develop ourselves. We don't have the label people as a resource to kind of give us the tools to develop. So I really love that what you're saying, because yeah, John, isn't it true that some people in like licensing and stuff, it's like they don't know what their own artistry sounds like. They'd rather just kind of do, which is that's fine, I guess. I'm not trying to like say one way is right or wrong, but I really like the idea of an artist having their own true sound, whatever that may be, that's authentic to themselves, that's in alignment with their artistry and their own creativity and expression, self-expression. And then comes the sync.
Yeah. Yeah. And to use sync as an example in this stack as well, I've had instances where, I've wanted to sync a track into a film, for example, as a music supervisor. And what fell down for the artist at the last minute was unfortunately their reputation. And it's a shame. But, we had to look at it in the sense of two things. One, from their own social media, does it align with the narrative of the film? Does that align? And if it doesn't, actually, we can't sync that. It could be so anti-brand of what the film is and what it's about that actually it's a really serious consideration for more niche projects. Or secondly, a reputation from the perspective of um, they they're not very they weren't in this instance very organized. And this kind of comes into the operational aspect in a sense, but unfortunately, as a result, it did impact their reputation. So they had a great song. It was highly syncable. It actually fit the tone of what we're doing perfectly. Um, and we're ready to go. But unfortunately, it was the reputation that made me and others pick someone else. In another example, the song was great. The trust and reputation was there because we might have worked with them before. They had great integrity, but what fell apart was the fact it was their systems. and their processes that weren't in place. So when we were asking for, okay, great, love the original, but do you have the instrumental version, or do you just have only background vocals? They didn't have it. We couldn't meet the deadline. Unfortunately, we can't sync you in. Like, we've got to move on to something else. So it's really, really quite interesting in how these things fall apart. And we just use sync as an example there, but yeah, that's why that reputation is very, very important as well to make sure, yes, you've got that relationship with the music supervisors, but in terms of integrity to your own work, is that to the right standard? And as a result, then do you have the systems in place that when a brief comes through, can you scale it quickly? Is it one stop that gets thrown around a lot and saying, is it a one-stop track? There's a reason for it. It makes life a lot easier for music supervisors. And then finally, you've got the song that's ready to go and is syncable directly into film.
Yeah. And the operational capital being, the second largest, um, because I mean, it's like, it's like, okay, you mean to tell me my songs are only a tiny bit of what I'm doing? No, but it is definitely dependent on these other tiers of the pyramid. And so let's just talk a little bit about this operational capital, setting up systems and partnerships and stuff. You had some really great examples, which are so, I think our MPS members will really love your examples. It seems like pretty close to home for many of us. Um, but so how do we ensure that we're getting these proper systems in place? I mean, how do you go? Because this is a complicated one. Well, they're all kind of complicated, but the operational capital sometimes is maybe where artists feel lacking the most. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but maybe there's a little bit of an insecurity, like, okay, well, I got songs. I know I got songs. I got a good personality, and but like, I don't know anything about systems. I don't know anything about automation. What can you dig in a little bit as to how we can, I mean, maybe you'll do this in the future, but can we dig in a little bit as to what exactly that looks like on the day to day for an artist?
Sure. Um, yeah,
I mean, that's a
it's
big question, so you don't have to just,
yeah. I mean, it's probably its own book.
right,
It's
right.
so layered. There's so much to it, right?
Or maybe a couple of
And
books.
yeah, it may be planned.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's so much in here to unpack, but it can be a lot of things.
And I
It
guess it
could
depends
be
on what the situation is. Let's say, yeah,
yeah.
you're a touring DJ, or you're a songwriter, or you're an instrumentalist.
Yeah, and but ultimately, I think there's a theme across pretty much all industries. To be honest, once you get down to the core of um, operations, within business, I would say, um, you've got project management system is a system. That's basically what your tasks, what's pending, and everything, and just basically almost having a to-do list. That is the system in itself of knowing that you're organized, right? It could be if you use Logic or whatever your DAW is. I'm a Logic fan, so if anyone isn't, apologies, but so I used to just use that for years, so that's my go-to. It's do I have templates that are ready to go, right? And it's not that isn't to put me in a box all the time, but it's effectively I don't want. So we use this a lot in film, and we have some ridiculous templates that are just so large. But the point being is if it's got every sound that you could possibly want in there and ready to go, so that you don't have to then scroll through everything, try and find that right sound. It's like, okay, no, I need these specific strings. This is what I'm going for. Cool, put it in. And then, for example, just as a bit of a bit of a tip, what we always used to do is we had the piano roll at the top, which used to just be a general sketch, to kind of play in what it was. You do the same in effectively, each part of the orchestra. So group of strings, group of horns, whatever, and that's your sketch track. And then from there, you'll then orchestrate from it. And that system makes it so much easier because then you've already started shaping the sound as you can go through, and you can really start to hear it. It's quicker. But then on top of that, then you can dive into the detail very, very specifically of saying, okay, love that, but let's now orchestrate over this for the full string section. Okay, that doesn't work here. I'm going to put that in the flutes or whatever. And it works really, really quite nicely. And within those same templates, what you basically do as well is, okay, what are the reverbs that I like to use? Because everyone has their own preferences, right? Like it's always what makes their sound, the delays, the reverbs and everything else that they want. It's very, very specific, and obviously it might change on songs, but generally speaking, you kind of have a sound and the things that you really like. It could be your mastering chain, that you really like, and it's about saving those presets ahead of time and kind of implementing them within somewhat of a template, so that when you are ready to go, you've got that inspiration straight away. You're not having to search and to find it. You can kind of almost just plug in and play, and it works really nicely. So that's an example from the creative sector, or creative setting. In terms of automation, that's really looking at looking at AI, and not it doesn't have to be AI, but it's effectively like workflows. So that could be as simple as a mailing list workflow. There's all sorts of tools out there like Zapier and no code like NE10. There's loads of different things, but without getting into detail too much, effectively what it is a process to take you to go from A to B in a way that really, if you were to put excessive time into it, would probably drain your own operational resource that you could outsource to something else. So if it isn't urgent and it can be delegated effectively, I would argue that it probably could be automated at scale. And this is really where this new technology comes in. And without leaning on AI too much, the advantages of that is that think of it as a tool, as an operational tool to be more efficient within that operational layer of your career, so that you don't have to excessively um, expand too much, whether that means losing equity within your business by bringing in more people who are going to take shares, or having to pay excessive fees for things that actually could be done in-house. Um, there's so much that can be automated now at scale, particularly within the music industry, but industry wide, that is an absolutely huge area to look into. Um, and then you got your partnerships as well. That could be your strategic partnerships. We're thinking about labels, publishers, stuff. When we're looking at publishers, you've got the two classic deals there, your co-publishing deal and your admin deal. They're very different partnerships. What does that mean? And they come with that different terms. The point being is you've got your trust and your reputation in place. You've then got those layers on top of it, which is your systems allowing you to get it into distribution quickly. It allows you to collect the data. Susie, you talked about previously about the metadata aspect of things, super important. That's your operational capital, your systems and processes in place. I think there's a massive opportunity for automating metadata at scale. I don't believe it's been done well yet, but I think it's a very, very good opportunity. Um, and therefore then allow you to do that process seamlessly, then distribute straight to the market, and then you don't have to worry about it. The song is done and live. So this is where it's where technology, I think, can be really, really advantageous
Yeah,
in the
and there, I
operational.
mean, still more to come because of
Yeah,
human invention and stuff. But I mean, it could be just something just as simple as um, a spreadsheet doing the math for you, and instead of you having to do the math, you have the spreadsheet do the math, and that's one way of automating something. So thank you for that. And then before we move on to the next graphic, just also anybody with questions, always questions are welcome. Let's get to this creative capital: songs, catalogs, masters. We feel like, artists, this is like sometimes we'll just stay in this little zone and not even look at operational capital, relational capital. It's easy to just like, put our heads down and create music and not do anything about it. So we still have to cultivate this part of it and still work on our songs and build our catalogs, but also um, this would be like, the protection of the masters and all that stuff, right? Anything that we should think about in this top tier here?
yeah. And just to mention on the operational perspective, just quickly, is also about predictive analytics as well.
Mm.
That's part of automation and systems as well. Very, very, very important. Um, think of that in the sense of, we talked about before how important it is in the first workbook of understanding where your income streams are and how reliable they are. If you can then that is part of predictive analytics as well, in the sense that if you can see what your flow of income in is and how regular and stable it is, you're then able to project what your future returns are going to be. And then that can provide valuation or valuation metrics for the future to allow you to lend against so that you don't have to be dependent on other sources that are more predatory in their deal terms.
Hmm.
Just gives you options.
Yeah,
Um,
it's great.
the so yeah, the creative capital, that is just quite literally, it is, yeah, your all your songs, your catalogs, it's wherever you sit on each side of the record. If you're an artist, it's that's the master side. If you're a writer and composer, that's sitting on the other side of the record, that compositional side. And it is that creative work at its core. It's your sound, and you're releasing that. And um, the reason why it's at the top is because basically, as soon as it's done, it's out there, it's completed. But without it, it all falls apart.
Um, what I love about this is that it's capital. And artists sometimes don't think of things in terms of capital. Because we're artists, we're not thinking like that. We don't, sometimes we don't consider our songs as assets, um, or something like that. But this is really great perspective for us. Susie Cool says, I'm finding MP3 tag very helpful with seeing all the data at one glance and filling in the gaps in batches. That goes in the topic of automating and streamlining metadata, which is a huge, again, this, you could have books on this. You could have an entire series just on metadata and automation. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's a really good topic to kind of move forward with. But in terms of this entire graphic, just want to see if anybody else has any kind of questions, comments, concerns about this before we move on to that other. You had one more graphic in this one, didn't you?
Yeah,
Yeah. Any other
Uh, uh,
questions? Yeah.
well, I just wanted to say Taylor Swift had a lot of trouble with her whole Masters issue because I think Scooter, whatever his name was, just kind of.
yeah,
Eh, not anymore though, huh? Yeah, she did all right. She did all right with the Taylor's versions.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, and that's a we can use that what example of what happened with Taylor Swift in terms of all three of these things.
yeah,
And like how she used this to move forward with what she did. And pretty freaking smart, if you ask me. Do you want to address that at
yeah.
all?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, the only thing that was really missing really was the top part, which was the creative capital, right? She lost control of the masters, but what she did have was the publishing aspect of it, where my understanding at least, is that she had massive influence over her publishing. She retained her writing rights.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it's the most important side of a record. If you're going to be on any side of the record, you should be on the compositional side. It's where it compounds the most. The money's in publishing, it's not in the master side or the record label, just to kind of really put that very bluntly. But the reason being is because effectively, every time you produce a new master, that also includes cover versions, re-records. It's basically a derivative of what the original composition and lyrics were. I mean, you've always got to get permission off those. So for every cover that's created, the revenue still comes back to the original writers. Now, there are obviously sometimes some deals that are put in place where there is, let's call it a bit of a joint venture that goes on between the existing writers or the new writers and the old writers. That's a side thing that kind of complicates the whole. But generally speaking, um, all the money sits in the publishing side. That's where you need to be, and where you can is where I encourage artists to write their own work where they can, write their own lyrics, come up with a hook melody or whatever that may be. It gives you points on the other side of the record. It's important because that's where it will compound. Masters in this example effectively can only be used and exploited once. The reason why I say that as well is if we just lean into sync real quickly before diving into the Taylor aspect, if there were periods where there was a very, very expensive sync track that needed to be put into a project. Effectively, how we got around it was that um, right. So it's quite interesting. A lot of them, without going on too much of a tangent, a lot of them put in their clauses MFN, which means most favored nations clause, right? It basically means on both sides of the record, whoever puts the highest price and the other person puts MFN, say, for example, they turn around and say, yep, 25 grand. The record label doesn't really know where to price it. They're just going to put MFN. It meets the other side. So it's 25.25. Now, what's interesting is with master versions, that also includes, as I said, the new re-records. So if an artist was performing live and it was on YouTube, for example, or it was a concert version, that's the new version of the original derivative, which was maybe the original writing and lyrics that were in the song. Now, why that's important for sync is because if it's particularly expensive, I'm not going to get the release studio version. It's way too expensive. It's got billions of streams, it costs us a fortune. But what I will do is I'll go to the record label and say, okay, of all the labels, who owns this version when they performed it in the US or the UK or in London at that concert? Oh, that only had, you know, 3 million views. That's going to be a lot cheaper than all the streams because it's a version which actually isn't released on any platform. It's very private and it's part of a catalog that never ever gets exploited. Cool. So let's do a deal there. It brings the price down a hell of a lot as a result, and then it allows us to get it synced into the film slightly differently. Now, obviously, it depends on the clarity and the quality of what you want to come through. But if it's kind of more generic kind of background stuff, it's not integral massively to the film, you can get away with it from a quality perspective. That's an example where actually, if you own the publishing, you're still winning because no matter what, that's you're still getting paid. But the record label or the master owner of those two versions, the studio version and the YouTube or concert version, are normally or sometimes completely different.
Yes.
Just a bit of context there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a great technique for music supervisors.
Yeah, right. No, we can tell, I think, when we're watching stuff. Yeah, and this is so great about ownership. I just love this conversation, just with everything that you know, a lot of our members have been through in the past, you know, few years. It's really, really nice to hear this. Very, very refreshing, in my opinion.
Do you want me to dive into the Taylor
Yes, please.
example? So going on to that example, we were talking about the fact that the masters were the issue. Obviously, what fell down in this model was the creative capital. She lost control of her masters because they were basically owned by someone else. However, what she did have in place was she had the relational capital, she had the trust, the reputation, and the integrity of her brand and with her fan base, which is absolutely massive. I mean, you do not want to get on the wrong side of the Swifties,
Right.
you know, because they are a powerhouse fan base, and it really, really showed in this example. And what else did she have? She had partnerships, you know, with her publishing company and the various connections that she built because of her reputation in the industry over the years. She could lean on pretty much anyone she wanted to that then aligned with her new brand and where she was going to go. Um, in terms of automation and systems, that's more a case of does she have the distribution network at scale to then therefore get it out into the public? Does she have that PR machine that will get it there? She did. So the operational capital and relational capital was always there. What she did, because obviously she had massive influence on the publishing side, is she then created new masters as a new version of the lyrics and compositions of what she originally created, hence why it was then called Taylor's version and why she was allowed to do the masters. She didn't have to seek permission to do that, providing she owned the original copyright on the other side of the record. And that's why she was able to get around it. If it had been the other way round, where it was the publishing side that was locked up, he would have had to get permission to re-release a master. So that's why the publishing is so, so important. That composition and lyrics is please, 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 please do not give away your writers' rights. It's why unions fight so hard to protect it because it is absolutely essential.
Yeah. So she did good by herself by owning it to begin with. She didn't have to go back because, you know, I mean, like back in the day, maybe, you know, back in the 90s, right? There were a lot of people that got burnt, or prior. I think isn't it like kind of infamous with some of the older generation, you know, some from the early recordings and stuff that they infamously did not own their writings. And I think by the time we get to Taylor Swift, the artists maybe have learned a thing or two, and so she does own it. She does
Well,
the
this is the
record.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing where it can get really, really quite nasty and predatory in my view, is where, say, for example, you have a really, really big artist. They're not actually involved in then the writing. In this example, they're not involved in the writing, whether that be the lyrics or the compositional aspect of the record. They're just purely there as the vocal artist. Right? And you're like, okay, great. So their only focus really is on the master side of the record. And in those days, and to be fair, they still are, they're very, very aggressive record label deals where they have a very, very small percentage of the part that's given to the performing artist. Now, if that company also said happen to have a publishing company off the back of it, they might hire, work for hire, mind, writers and producers or composers to produce that music for them and buy them out flat. So then the artist, one, they're not even involved in that side of the record to begin with. So their only money and revenue stream comes from the master side and the little sliver that they've got in their contract. But if it was just so happened to be bought out because the writer side wasn't ever protected, then there's just losing money left, right, center. This is why actually the economy now is somewhat better because there are unions in place and others to protect the writers' rights to begin with.
Hmm.
Um, but that's why it was, in particular, in many circumstances, why it was so aggressive, and you'd have, so much money being made in the industry, but it never went to the actual creative
Mhm.
because the deals were structured in a way that they were the face of the brand. They got their 10%, 15% at best. They never were involved in the writing. They were never involved in the composition. And it made it very, very difficult. But if you are, it's great.
Now, you mentioned earlier if you are giving up ownership, understand why. If I hear this sometimes in the independent artist world and sync and stuff, and people trying to get placements and everything is like, all right, I own this, but or I wrote this, but this person can get me this or provide this or do this thing, so I'm gonna give them a certain percentage for that. And so even if the person didn't write it, they're getting writing credits on that. What do you say to stuff like that? I mean, I have an opinion, but
Hmm.
I mean, because you say
I
understand
think I
why,
think
right?
yeah, I mean it depends. I can understand why it happens. I think ultimately, providing you still retain your writer's rights, if that's the deal that you feel is aligned to you and where your career wants to go, then fine. I think there are other ways to do it. Um, but I mean, it could be very, very specific. It might just provide so much leverage in that example that it's actually and genuinely worth it to them from what their deal makeup is. But understand that if that is on the compositional side of the record, that realistically, that is, I mean, it's for perpetuity anyway, but it's a more aggressive ownership position than it would be if it was on the master side. Now, that's, I think, something that people really do have to realize and understand with that.
Right. Because it also doesn't something similar happen in the film world where like there's these people working on a film and then somebody who's like not really even involved like gets some huge credit on the film and they weren't even involved, but he can get some kind of deal or they can get some kind of, there's some kind of leverage
Yeah.
that that person holds, so you see a big fat credit there, where
Yeah.
it's like, so that happens in different areas, right?
Yeah, it happens all the time. I'd argue it probably happens in any industry. In some respects, in terms of the corporate world, I'd imagine it's probably no different from, you know, you creating a new framework within a business and then someone stamping their name on it at the end of it, and saying it that they were contributing and being involved on it when in actual fact they didn't really produce anything. They maybe just passed it up the chain. Unfortunately, it is the thing that happens. I think that as you become more independent, I don't believe you have to rely on that as much when you're in certain models where it's the norm that there are 6 to 8 writers that are always added on, or there's another executive producer that's just added on because they connected you with such and such person in the film industry, and then that finally got you the financing for the film. Yeah, it's a bit crazy, but unfortunately, like those models exist because that's the traditional way of doing that. I think there's a better way of doing it when you're independent, and when you are independent, you don't really have to play by those old rules, in my view. Mm,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's that's good to hear. Okay. Anything else on this, John, before we move on?
Um, yeah. A little bit of a side note on the writer's share is you might find, and there is a trend, it's been going on for a long time actually, but um, it's interesting. Have a look at a couple of the credits on artists that have children. You might end up finding that they will include their children on the writing credits. You think, oh, that's ridiculous. Well, the reason being is because in copyright, um, how it all works is basically it's the art, or is it the it's the life of copyright is that until the artist dies plus 50 to 75 years or something. But it's the last death of the writer. So if you've put your child on it, are they getting around it by extending the copyright of those specific records? It's ingenious to be honest, but like that's how they're doing it.
Mhm.
So, you've got someone who's maybe at the end of their career, they might then work on sibling or bring them into the writing session. Ultimately, all of it goes into the same estate anyway, but it extends the protection from a copyright perspective. It's really
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, because yeah, okay. That's really, really cool to hear. Um, great. Thank you so much for that. Any questions on that, guys? People in the room? And just want to say thank you so much for being here. We have 5 women in the room, so thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you. And thank you also, off camera, hold on. Thank you to everybody in MPS, you, John. I know you're an ally, and everybody in MPS who, holds that inclusive mentality and uplifts others regardless of what they look like, where they're from, gender, all those things. We definitely want to include everybody. And, you know, women are somewhat unrepresented or underrepresented in many, many facets of the music industry. So it's really nice to see women here and just support people that maybe feel marginalized, because I think what you're doing here, John, is very, very empowering. So thank you so much for all of this. Okay, and wonderful. Okay, let's talk about this artist's balance sheet, John. Assets and liabilities. This is great to break it down like this.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting because as I said before, like the original version of this book was very, very business heavy. I tried to try and strike the balance better in this version where, we slowly kind of come into it. But again, it's thinking of this career as a business and as a founder mentality, rather than necessarily being reactive. And in all balance sheets, there's always your assets and liabilities, and it's just kind of reframing, the opportunities that you have. At the end of the day, as it kind of says on there, all your creative works, your masters, your publishing, and even your brand, that they are all your assets. They add value. They're massive to you. Um, I would actually say your reputation is an asset, but it also could be a liability. It sits in the middle. It depends on where you wish to be placed, right? But it's really, really important, and that's where when anything in that stack. So if you think about that capital stack, if anything then starts shifting to the right because it's not aligned, then it all becomes a liability, and the entire thing falls apart. Um, so yeah, really, really interesting. The liabilities aspect of things. The reason of doing that and framing it that way is because um, when these advances are put in place, there's often a misconception about what that actually means financially. Artists do need to understand that ultimately it is a liability. And it can get very, very messy when there's all sorts of clauses like cross-collateralization and all sorts of other things. Um, and these advances can become very, very predatory. So it's to kind of frame it in the sense that, look, it can be strategically advantageous to have advances and to have debts. There's good debts and there's bad debts in finance, but just understand more often than not they are liabilities, and it depends how you use them as to which how advantageous they can be to your career.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Exploitation risk. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, lay it again. Um,
Yeah, just
yeah,
a little bit, just a little bit about like, I mean, what exactly are we talking about here?
uh, I've purposely kept it open because of what happens in the industry, but
Mm.
it can be a variety of things. It could be anything from safeguarding, on a more serious tone. It could also be in terms of exploitation of your own rights, in terms of how things are. So, say, for example, you finish your record and you've basically signed away your rights in the sense that they can be exploited by a third party without your consent. Um, that's of course then a risk in terms of from a licensing perspective too. So yeah, multi-layered, everything from effectively safeguarding to licensing and how your rights are effectively used without your consent. And I use rights generally because that is multi-category, including your own safe.
Yeah. So that'll look different for everybody depending on the situation. Non-reversion?
Non-reversion, yeah. It's basically just losing your copyright or your ownership for perpetuity. So reversion is a clause that is in contracts where, and actually they've added this now in major labels, and this is the irony, right? Where it's like, oh, people end up slating the majors, they prefer the independent labels, but actually in fairness to the majors, because they're put on so much pressure, usually it's those that are refining they're actually refining their contracts more often because of the amount of regulatory pressure and government pressure that's often put on them, rather than in the independents who may not have been around as long, may not have the infrastructure or know the industry as well, and therefore aren't structuring their contracts distinctly as maybe they should do in line with regulatory and union pressures. I mention that because sometimes people genuinely lean more on the independent side of things, but often I've actually read a lot of independent contracts that are actually probably just as bad, if not worse, because they're using outdated contracts. Yeah, the point being on reversion is at least in the UK, they push very, very hard on reversion rights to say that after a certain period of time, the rights are reverted back to the artist, the writer, whoever, and it isn't purely owned by the publishing company or the label for perpetuity. That was
Mm.
the whole idea of that.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that was actually then pushed through into then the film sector with composers as well. It was expected and has been expected. Um, that many dealings include non-reversion moving forward.
Mm.
But yeah, a lot of it's pushed down because of union pressure. They
Good.
did that, and
Yeah.
they really pushed that forward.
I mean, it serves us to know these things and understand where everybody's at so that when we're looking at these contracts, we know where it is on the scale.
Yeah, and it's effectively saying, how you can turn that into an asset is saying, okay, look, I'm happy to do this, label deal or whatever, but I would like reversion rights, within 5, 10, 20 years, whatever you decide to. Um, I've done that on various deals myself where I've put reversion clauses in there, and then by the end of that term, it comes back to me.
Hmm.
They'll have an exclusive license for that period of time, and then after that, it'll come back to me because at the time it was an operational headache for me to have to deal with it. So that was the trade I decided to make, providing I got it back after X amount of time.
So it is a liability to not get it back, obviously.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
because it's
and
gone forever.
right, it's gone forever. And buyouts. Well, maybe some people don't know what a buyout is, so let's just explain exactly what that is, but and why it's a liability.
Sure. So slightly different to non-reversion. It's similar in principle in the sense that you both lose ownership of and control of both. Reversion, however, in that context is that you're still getting revenue coming through as a result of it. So whether that be a publishing deal or a record label deal, they're still paying you during the duration that they're exploiting it because you're still sitting on parts of the record because you have either your performance share on the master or on the compositional side, you have your writer's share. In a buyout, however, every aspect of the record is completely bought out for perpetuity
Hmm.
forever.
Yeah.
So your writer share is bought out, your publishing is bought out on your on your master side, um, everything, including your artist share and whatever. Any back end revenue is gone forever.
Hmm.
They pick a number and it is gone. It is very, very common, massively common. I would say it's more common in sync. In terms of you doing custom music.
Yeah.
It's very, very common in gaming and putting music to games. Very common in the film industry.
And like, let's
Massively
say
common.
I, you know, big companies, real, let's say like a Disney or something like that is like, you don't own this. You write this for us, but you don't own it. And so that
Yeah.
would that be considered like a buyout? Basically, they're buying out your music. You don't, it never comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. If you don't own anything and you don't get to keep your writer's share if you sit on that side of the record, or you don't get to keep your performing share of the master, then yes, it's a buyout.
Yeah.
And
And
in Interestingly, there are finance companies out there, I'll use film as an example, who will finance the music department. Um, and as a result of that, because they're fronting all the money, they will buy out the composer's rights completely. So, which in my view is very, very aggressive. I personally, the company does not operate in that way. I understand the model for doing it, but um, I lean on the fence of effectively, the writer's share and the performer's share should always be protected.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so yeah, it happens a lot.
Hmm. Susie asks, does that happen with single song contract? I think we're talking about non-reversion, but to my understanding, it can happen anywhere. I,
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I've
it
seen
can.
it. I've seen people get offered contracts for a single song.
Yeah, I mean, my a contract that I had where it included reversion was on a single title track, was for film.
Yeah.
And I put that in there. Most commonly, it is usually put on like a multi-slate load of IP, such as an album or an EP, or you're in a three-record label deal, for example. That's normally just like snuck in there. Um, and then you would hope you'd get non-reversion as a result of that. Oh, so you would have reversion as a result of that. Apologies. Um, but yeah, it does also happen in single titles.
Wonderful. Okay. Any other questions on this before we start to wrap it up because we look at the time. Equity equals ownership percentage, freedom, and peace index. And this is really a great way to kind of start wrapping up here when we start talking about alignment and freedom and what equity really is. You say every song is equity.
Mm.
Um, and that that peace index, how much it aligns. So can you just talk about that little line that you have, the ownership percentage, freedom percentage, peace index, and just wrap it up for us there.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, equity is effectively how much of something that you own, as a percentage of that pie of 100%, how much of it do you own? Worth noting as well, I mean, without getting into a lot of very specific detail, but in business, um, say for example, you're going to do a joint venture with another artist or someone else, there are different types of shares within a business. So you don't have to always have the majority percentage. If you have certain voting rights, can be classed as more control over something else. So just to bear in mind from a business perspective, it doesn't always mean owning more. It means the type of control that you specifically have. Within music, it is specifically tied to the actual ownership percentage out of the you own. Freedom again within that, it all kind of really comes back to control. How much freedom do you have within that deal? Directly, usually tied to ownership specifically. To be honest with you, the more ownership you have, the more freedom that you have because you have more leverage or optionality within the deal typically. Um, if there's multiple writers on a record or whatever, if you have a higher ownership, you could argue that you might have more say or leveraging or negotiating power with maybe a publisher or who. It's just a bit of a brief example. I'd use the other side of a record, for example, where you have the master. Um, the artist would have more negotiating power over the session musician that might actually get a income stream off the result of the master being exploited. It's just because their ownership is far less and their freedom within the deal is far less as well, um, for the session musician. And then the piece index again aligns into that in terms of how well it's aligned with you. If it is ultimately aligned well with you, your ownership generally increases, as well as your freedom within the deal as well. If you're not aligned, generally speaking, you're probably going to be exploited somewhere within that matrix.
Mm, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and the peace index, did we get into that?
Yeah, that was like just that
That's
bit at
what
the
you
end in
just said.
terms of
Right.
exploitation.
Um, in terms of um, our assets versus liabilities, when you say balance between these two, what you're saying is when we look at it, if you do an assessment and you're looking at more liability than you have assets, there's a problem, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
that's why it's balance. That's why you call it a balance sheet.
Yeah, and you don't want the liabilities, and if you are going to take them on, it's very strategic in nature. So, for example, you might take on a debt, but you might be able to service that debt because the assets that you have cash flow enough that it offsets the debt, right? So, in that circumstance, it's actually yes, it's a liability on a balance sheet perspective, but it advantages you later down the line because you have liquidity. So, like. Yes, effectively, you want to completely get rid of the right-hand side unless you're using it for very strategic and very specific circumstances, and you want to build your assets up because the assets bring you money and increase your net worth. Your liabilities reduce it down.
Yeah.
They take money usually.
I mean, this is a lot to think about. It's definitely not something
It's a
that
heavy chapter.
it's a
Yeah.
heavy chapter. It's not something that it just like takes, overnight to understand. So I appreciate all of this. Gretchen says, so many excellent points to ponder. Thanks very much. Sorry, my chair is so squeaky. Um, and anybody in the room, if you have any other questions about this, anything else, John, about this particular graphic before we wrap it up here? We're about at time.
Not this particular graphic. I can quickly show you the workbook very quickly as an
Yes,
overview, if
let's
that would
do
be
that.
helpful.
Yes, please. And thank you, everybody. While John's putting that up, just want you all to know, thank you so much for being here. Musicianspeersupport.com is the website. Also, theartistblueprint.com is John's website. We will post some links in the chat here that you can grab to get all these resources because, John, this will be on the website?
Yep,
Okay.
yep, on the website. Um, so this is the um, third workbook. Um, it's basically this balance sheet diagnostic because I understand that there was so much to unpack here. It's yeah, it's a tough chapter. So the whole idea of this is understanding really what you own, what you owe, and what you can build on. Okay. So everything from understanding, your assets and what they are in terms of your publishing rights, your finished masters, quick inventory check, picking what you currently hold, what you don't, um, and if it's anything else, tick it and then kind of right next to it. It kind of helps to help process it. Then you've got an asset strength score. So looking at your catalog depth, the quality, your commercial readiness, your metadata organization, for example, Susie, as you were going through with your batch tagging and processing, really, really important. Your brand cohesion, how do the tracks that you've currently got actually align with your brand and where you want to go? Just little audit points. Your balance sheet, specifically done, obviously the red being the liabilities, kind of really put that out. That could be you might pick a specific record or deal that you might have, right? And that will be, no, it's loaded with debt, it's full of advances. I haven't got my non-reversion rights, and it's like all on the red. But actually, it's a very useful exercise because then you can identify actually, that's really clear now. I'm not going to do that. I don't want that again because it doesn't align with me, or maybe it does. Then you got your liability check. In terms of, inconsistent workflows, no catalog direction, weak metadata organization, that kind of stuff, poor pricing and negotiation. Really, the idea to identify what that is early on. Your liability impact, your inputs and outputs, and the impact on your income as a result. Your score in terms of your financing, your overall structure of your business. your skill markability, your release infrastructure, that kind of things. By infrastructure, I basically mean everything from your metadata. I mean, interpret it as you wish, but everything from your metadata all the way in terms of your distribution platform to get it into to the DSP onto Spotify and the likes, right? Does it work well for you? If it does and it's really efficient, it's 5. If it doesn't, it just gives you points to reference as to like why is it a 2 and how can I get that? Then income stream overview, taking all the streams that you earn money from currently and those that you could then activate. A little bit of a checkpoint, a little bit again in terms of ownership and retention in terms of the rights that you own. Numbers and clarity in terms of your creative income per year, what's predictable, what's unpredictable, what's the highest performing, and where is money lost. Then your wealth position, your 30-day action plan, and then finally that kind of comes as to all the worksheets do right at the end, your baseline summary. So by the end of it, my hope is that you, with each of the workbooks, you've got one page at the end of it where you're like, this is a snapshot of every single chapter, and it's a little action plan that I can kind of take forward and know what to do next. So
Really,
hopefully that
really good.
helps.
That is wonderful, John. Thank you so much. Super organized and just what a huge gift and tool. And I just, yeah, OMG in the chat. And I just want everybody to know, John does this for free. I'm not paying him. Nobody's paying him. So, wow. You kind of have to wonder why, right? And it's
That's why.
you love it. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why one would do that. And when you start digging into as to why one would do it, it's pretty eye-opening. And so I really appreciate you, John. Also, I just want to go real quick. I know we're over time, but I missed this one when Susie says they talk about points for producers too, just making the distinction between
Yes.
points on the master compared to points on the recording on the publishing because usually when producers are asking for points, they're asking for percentage points on the master, not on the publishing. Correct, John?
Yeah, correct. Unless the producer is actually writing the melody, of which then they'll come onto the other side. And worth a note as well that usually the points that they're getting are sub or below the artist. So effectively, it comes out of the writer's revenue share. So it's basically prorated to what comes through the artist.
Okay.
Um, I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah.
Because if you increase the share, you can make it better for producers. There are ways around that model that can make it more transparent, but that's an aside for another day.
And again, that's, I mean, I'm like getting flashbacks of Clubhouse when we would talk about producer points, and it was just nightmares when we spent 3-4 hours talking about producer points. So thank you so much for that. And any other questions from the room before we wrap it up? John, any other kind of closing thoughts? We have, let's see, Chrissy says a lot to ponder and good to spend some time thinking about these points for
Mm.
sure. Yeah. Susie says we will buy the book. Thank you so much. Please buy John's book.
No,
Really, that's the only way we can kind of give back. He's not like asking us to, but I am asking you to buy his book because what a great way to support somebody who's so generous with their knowledge and wisdom. And it's just like, you guys know, I mean, people know, like there's a different way to do things that isn't exactly so appealing. This is very appealing to me. This is just the best. This is just so awesome. Anybody watching the replay also, we will be posting these links. So look at the description or the comments below. We're going to post those links so you have it because John is taking questions on X, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. If you have questions there, that's how you can go ask him. The resources are at artistsblueprint.com. And for people listening, also for the visually impaired, just going to spell it out for you. That's www.artistsblueprint.com, artistsblueprint.com. And where can they buy the book, John?
it's on the website. Yeah, I haven't done it through Amazon and everyone else.
Just go to
Yeah,
the
it
website then.
just yeah, or book.artistblueprint.com. I think it comes under as well.
Okay.
But
So
yeah,
everybody,
all on the website, including all of the audio book and everything else
okay,
on
John, it
Apple
says
Podcasts.
your book is sold out on the website. So once you restock,
I've
um,
just updated it for you.
okay, so they should be able to get that for you. Wonderful. Okay, so wow, I mean that is that was huge. So I'm giving you a round of applause. Like wow, thank you so much for putting some things in perspective for all of us. Just as we wrap it up here, what do we have to look forward to next week, John?
It is chapter 4,
And
which is
while
ownership
he's
and
doing that,
leverage.
everybody, please just you can email me at mps@musicianspeersupport.com. We take donations. You can go to our Patreon, join our Patreon if you like. We offer mentorship and all kinds of cool things. And yeah, email me if you have any questions. I'm doing free one-on-ones for people who are attending these sessions, so please feel free to come email me and come see me. If you have not seen me already one-on-one over Zoom, I'd love to just spend time and chat with you and see how we can share resources with each other. What we got, John, for next week?
It is ownership and leverage. So the theme is power. How can we protect and grow what we create?
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Yeah, and again, all of these we can just like extrapolate and spend so much time spent talking about each of these, but the way you present it is very succinct and substantial. So I really, really appreciate that. Anything else, John?
No, thank you. Thanks for your
Okay.
time.
Thank you so much, everybody. Please give it up for Jon Altham. What a great session. Oh my gosh. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And thank you, Chrissy, Deb, Susie, Kelly, and Gretchen for being here. Really, really appreciate your presence. Everybody watching the replay, thank you so much for watching. Please comment below. Let us know that you watched it. Let us know what you thought about it, any thoughts or anything like that. But always know that you're welcome to come join us live, especially if you have questions. We'd love to hear them. It's 3 p.m. Eastern for the next until the end of January, until our 5-year anniversary in January. So thank you so much. And John, thank
Excellent.
you. Really, really huge thanks. Appreciate everything.
Thank you too, and thank you for all the questions as well.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.